And I will have to explain a bit more what I think about that. One look at history, I think, tells us that whether or not we use a new technology does not mainly depend on the question of whether we have common ideas or not. For instance, communities with very similar ethics sometimes have huge problems. And some communities with very big inequalities sometimes can go on for thousands of years without any major problems observed from the outside. So I guess it depends on what one defines ethics as. Rather, I believe, in different situations, conflicting parties have different interests and therefore perceive something as a dilemma, or define them as a dilemma. In principle, I believe one could agree, as an example, with the use of cloning technology. But on the other hand, in practice, one could make a consideration and advise against it, owing to the realization that the technology could be misused. So often an ethical idea can have many different interpretations. One can think in theory, cloning is a very good idea, it could bring lots of good to people, but on the other hand, realizing that particularly interest group might misuse it would change the situation. So I'd like to keep that in mind. Well, the same could be said about nuclear weapon technology and biological weapons. In one situation, humans sell biological weapons to make a profit. In others, they drop a bomb out of a rational choice or moral indignation. Rather than defining the lack of human knowledge as problematic in trying to solve difficult questions such as animosity, religious clashes and political inequality, I think we should learn how inequality in power relations have come about historically. For ideas cannot be understood even a little bit without the history of ideas. The suggestion that an idea map could somehow be made and used for solving problems is a very optimistic one. That human knowledge is overrated has been concluded by many thinkers, but that clashes of ideas somehow could be solved by placing all possible ideas into a gigantic idea bank seems to derive from, well, a scholastic mind. The belief in the human control of ethics and ideas has often been criticized as being a project of positivism and the Enlightenment. One of the pillars of the positivist belief is in the power of human knowledge is Plato's views of ideas. Plato regarded ideas as mental maps, as the shadows of a finite number of images. They were types or archetypes. In other words, ideas were depicted spatially as related types that varied according to the way you looked at them. These types were eternal and therefore formed an ahistorical taxonomy. Such ahistorical taxonomies revived during the Renaissance. They were also part and parcel of developments in biology, such as the taxonomy, developed by the Swedish botanist Linnaeus. His taxonomy was similarly flat. It was timeless. This philosophical current, therefore, has been criticized in both East and West and elsewhere for its neglect of temporal relations. Darwin's evolution inserted time into this equation. It was a special kind of time. It took slices out of history and put errors into history, especially when it was projected onto society. So here, Darwinist evolution wouldn't be a discussion, but the social Darwinists who projected their ideas of biological evolution onto society. They used time to link primitive societies to complex societies vertically. In that sense, well, similar to the discussion we just have had about can we discern between genetically higher forms and lower forms? And, well, the answer was no. Social Darwinists have said yes all along. A serious accusation that still holds today was directed at the attempts by social Darwinists to project their taxonomies onto human society. This led to two extremes of the eugenic movement and ideologies of human equality. both ideologies have enormous potential for human disaster in times of conflict. The former, because it regards some categories of humans as better equipped than others. The latter, because human equality tends to be related to one ideal type to which the rest of humanity is expected to conform. In this context, notions of race, physical health, and normal behavior are closely related. Many big problems, such as wars, are only triggered, not caused by the clashes of ideas. A more profound look at wars shows that they usually occur as the unintended consequences of actions and non-actions. And these are part and parcel of complex historical processes which are irreducible to cerebral neurology. One example would be obvious, like Hitler. Wars weren't caused by him. It was a historical process that led to that war, and Hitler happened to trigger certain ideas which had lots of consequences. But his vegetarianism also had consequences, also his holism. It was the constellation of different historical phenomena and the spirit of the time. Eugenics was not just prevalent in Germany, also in the United States, also in Holland, also in Japan. So I think we should carefully look at what we think of as what is a war, as an idea, or what is a... let's go on before this regards the question of whether or not it is possible to create a human idea map. I believe that instead of creating a mental map of all ideas, it is more useful to put together a thesaurus of human folly. At entrance, number 1, in my view, we had better put human over self-confidence. The belief that a better understanding of the thinking of others has survival value in evolution is another notion deriving from biology, projected onto society. In this case, it is used in support of a dangerous form of idealism that misunderstands the power relations between people. For who are we talking about? Is it the traditional Chinese saying, know thy enemy? Or is it know thy partner in love? Of course, it just all depends on how you apply the knowledge you have, how you apply the ideas. And this has to do not just with ideas, but also with relations between people, whether they are the same, similar, or not. Well, for instance, one can argue that women have been seen as being strong at understanding others. But, well, even though I'm not really sure that's true, I don't think it brought them very far. Whatever we mean by understanding others, as long as we don't know what it means, which seems to be the case here, how can we know it has survival value? It is well known that in the evolution of species, criteria can be applied for fitness in a certain environment, with hindsight only. This is why the nature of evolutionary laws is tautological. In the case of humans, we cannot even apply criteria with hindsight, as the relationship between humans and their environment changes extremely fast. This is partly a result of the human ability to reflect upon its own behavior. Now I'd like to get into the concept of idea, which has been elaborated upon a lot in the proposal in the PIM and the P. At some points it's defined as a part of memory, at others as a linguistic expression. Again, also as rational thought, rational planning, a mental map, countable unit, or choices of response. However, in the main part of the paper it's been worked out in the meaning of two definitions, and these have been the choices of response or just countable units. The proof for this is on page 1, apparently, is that surveys held in different countries yield similar views when respondents are asked their opinion about technology. The fallacy of equating survey questions, however, and the statistical analysis with a storehouse of exhaustive ideas seems to be obvious to anyone who has ever dealt with opinion polls in very sensitive discussions with political opponents. Surveys themselves limit the number of possible answers, Therefore, they also have a limited choice, and are notoriously conservative also in principle. This closed and limiting character of surveys is a result of the way in which questions are posed. For instance, are you for or against modern technology? Well, how do you find modern technology? If you refer to computers, most people, at least here, would probably say no. Maybe it would be different if we're talking about biological weapons. So it just depends on what you mean by it. Also, it's limited by the way in which the possible answers are arranged, especially in multiple choices. Of course, the choice is limited. The number of ideas you could extract from those, of course, is also limited. By the relationship between questionnaire and respondents, the ideas in a survey are also limited. There's always a hierarchy between the questioner and the respondent, also per definition, because the respondent has to respond, has to answer questions. Of course, they can refuse, but they are always the ones that are responding. The other limitation is the particular point in space and time at which the survey is held. Thus, if asked at Heathrow Airport, what do you think about the war between Iraq and the West? Well, I can tell you Heathrow Airport a few days ago was full of military. Well, most people would have said, well, I'm against. Most people around Heathrow probably, because, well, they were the most vulnerable in that situation. So, time and place, whether you use a telephone or whether you stand in front of someone, if the questioner is a huge person and the one responding a very small person, all these things have influences on the ways that questionnaires are being filled in. So problematic in surveys are meaning, interpretation and perception, number of choices presented, relations of power and temporal and spatial factors that are intimately linked to how the dynamics of perception, thought and human life work as a whole. Lastly, I'd like to say something about the unit of research used in, well, both DNA mapping and in mental mapping. The notion that a link between a gene, for instance, a speech gene, which I don't believe really exists, can be made to a human phenotype, such as speech, tells us something about one relation, not about a cause. No gene has any causal powers for generating a certain characteristic of a society. The suggestion that it may have, quote, enabled the social emergence of modern human communities, unquote, indicates that genes could have causal power and that it can be isolated as a causal source. Here a parallel is drawn between genes and ideas. And I think there is maybe a misstep in the logic here. For instance, if we look at the practice, the idea of footbinding in Chinese history that started around the 11th, 12th century, well, the number of Chinese people has certainly increased since then, but it doesn't mean, for instance, that footbinding has any survival value. So we should have a good look at what genes do and what exactly they can cause, and that's certainly not at all clear from biological research yet. Popular ideas of the gene as clear and distinct causal agents constituting the basis of all aspects of organismic life have become embedded in society and hard to dislodge. The same is true for the image of a genetic program. Both concepts carry much historical baggage. In fact, the complexity of development dynamics have undermined the conceptual adequacy of genes as causes of development. It is important to get a better understanding of the language functions in biological research. For instance, the concept of gene has a very precise value in the specificity of the experimental context. Distinct markers are used to define genes in experiments. But if you take it into a different context, you will need different markers. That's how biology works, and there's nothing wrong with that. But gene talk also is used as a tool for persuasion. It has rhetorical power, invoked not only in securing funding and promoting research agendas, but also in marketing the products. Historically, the gene as a single entity was taken to be the guarantor of intergenerational stability, the factor responsible for individual traits. By the middle of the 20th century, the gene had come to be recognized as a real physical molecule. At the end of the 20th century, the shortcomings of the image of the gene as a self-replicating molecule of DNA has become easier to discern. In fact, the term gene may have become a hindrance to the understanding of biology. As a consequence, it shapes popular hopes and anxieties in ways that are often off target and counterproductive to effective discussions of public policy. So the difficulties, however, come when we remove the concepts of evolution of ideas or evolution of DNA from biological evolution into universal history. In considering the group as a unit of selection, for instance, one should not take too impoverished a look of what constitutes a group. Groups can be defined in many ways, and all sorts of ideas can be attributed to them. Of course, important is to see whether people define themselves according to certain ideas, or whether we ask representatives to define themselves. Of course, someone's identity, someone's culture depends on the way a certain person feels at a certain moment. It's quite simple, really. When I'm in a room full of men, and the men look at me very much as if I'm a woman, my identity at that moment will probably be that of a woman. If I'm in China, I usually feel like the representative of the West, because I'm treated as such. At the football games in Holland, of course, I'll be all for the Dutch football team. But when England is winning the World Cup, well, of course it's very obvious where my identity lies. So it's also a thing that's being manipulated. It moves, it changes. It changes according to context. So not only according to history, but also the history of a lifetime of situation is important in defining the different dimensions of ideas, which I think multiply according to every situation we can think of, which is, I think, well, pretty many. Well, I think I'm over my time there, but I'll just do the conclusion. Well, as I tried to explain, that some ideological factors might be responsible for limiting the number of ideas that we can think of. It doesn't mean that there are not more than we can think of. The same may be true for the adoption of a paradigm of rational choice theory, as I think we could have observed in the PIMP. It is really a theory that's been developed in the 1970s in the United States. It's been applied to society by George Homans. You might have heard of it. He was especially very popular in conservative intellectual circles, because behaviorism is a theory that can be used for political endings that define society as something that doesn't change, but has certain functions, which has been exploited by politicians. The paradigm of rational choice theory has been put forward as a very adequate tool for the mental mapping of ideas, by defining the number of ideas, action and subsequent responses as limited, though variable, according to page 2, and personal history, genetics, culture, family and upbringing as sources of ideas. Only apparently it appears as if ideas are countable, for the countability of the ideas are entirely due to the notion that personal history, genetics, culture, family and upbringing exist outside of this world as abstractions that do not count because they somehow exist outside of our reality, outside of history, outside of relations of power. This is important since here we come to the crux of why the social sciences have been little successful in applying scientific models onto society. For the problem is that the notion of, or tools we use for defining society at the same time are also culturally and socially mediated. Even though similar tools are available to all humans, they define and use them differently in different cultures, positions, times and circumstances. And the only way to approach an understanding of these differences is by realizing that our own tools of understanding different human beings are only of heuristic value. And even if we would manage by some miracle to create such a mental map, I believe it would be a world without much creativity, with little cultural surprises, and we probably would be all out of a job. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Meenakshi first, please, and then Frank. Where's the microphone? Thank you. It's coming along.
Hundreds and hundreds of concepts, of ideas of the cow. And well, people use it as a resource of ideas, and these are kind of limitless because they recreate it and created every time and every second in space.
One more point.
Okay.
When you said about social Darwinism, I want to go back to the evolution theory.
Right.
I was just wondering, Darwin proposed survival of the fittest. And do you think survival of the fittest theory also applies in developing your ideas to survive?
Well, it's very hard to check. It's impossible to falsify. Just as I gave you the example of the idea of the footbinding. I mean, what's the idea? Like, if I survive, will that be because I had a very good idea when I was 6 and I stuck to it? Or is it because I live in a rich society and I seem to have survived all right? So I don't think I can answer that question if I want to be honest. It's also one of the reasons why I don't think it's a very good argument for, well, stating or making a link between accumulating ideas and survival, because, well, there's no guarantee how they will be used.
Frank?
Margaret, I've been to a lot of bioethics conferences, not as many as Daryl, to a lot. And this is the best paper that I've ever heard at a bioethics conference. I admire your erudition and the depth of your analysis. And I enjoyed every moment of it. I want to go back to the beginning, if I might. You started with Plato. Okay. The boring thing about Plato is that his ideas are static and eternal and unchanging. What for me is the exciting thing about Plato is that his ideas come from another world. I don't know what, but they come from another world. Socrates, who was probably just Plato's mouthpiece in most of these dialogues, he had what he called a daemon, which told him he was doing something unethical when he started to do something unethical. And he spoke of this as sort of something like an angel or a deity of some sort, and again from another world. When I speak with scientists, when they are not writing scientific papers or giving scientific lectures, but when they've drunk a little or when they're being informal, they also talk about an idea that they got in a dream, or a crazy idea that came into their head, and then they finally publish it. Or I also think of acts of great genius, which are unpredictable. Einstein's theory of relativity, and so on. I want to know if you think that maybe there is some totally unknown source of ideas.
Well,
If that makes any sense at all, or if it's totally crazy.
well, it makes sense because, well, everyone's been looking for the mechanism behind creativity, because it's, of course, an enormous source for, especially academics, because it means their career will flourish if they make a very big invention. Well, I'm not really sure. I've never had such experience, so I cannot say for myself. But I do believe that people who've had a very stable environment around them can be shocked or by a different experience, and that might be anything from alcohol to maybe prodding in your brain by a surgeon. So I do believe that it's possible to get such experiences, but I don't believe that it has many results if the person in question hasn't had a certain training, either education or training at a farm or wherever, a kind of taxonomy, as it were, to place it in. I mean, you need that basis before you can compare new
writing
ideas.
it up or doing an experiment after you get the idea.
Yes, it needs to fit into something that someone is being used to be in. And I think that might be, it's a theory that I've read several times, is that people with stable cultures, from this culture can be anything from religion to a certain kind of upbringing, often come, because of the clashes they have in their daily life with other people and in society, they sometimes become really creative, exactly because of that reason, because somehow they've been shocked and mixed up. But that's all I can say, I'm sorry.
Okay, last comment.
I have a question. I have studied biology more than 60 years before. Someone said survival is the fittest. How today's biologists understand to fit the fittest? Also, Americans are fittest. How to understand? To fit. Who is the fittest?
Well, as I'm trying to argue, well, fittest in human society you can only see with hindsight, and then you can't even say with certainty what has caused someone to survive. But, well, seeing you here, I think you must have done something to become really fit, so maybe you could tell us sometime.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We have to move on, and I'll have to reply to all the suggestions in the discussions tomorrow. I think it's very interesting. We had a paper this morning from Rick and a paper from Margaret today, which are very valuable because they criticize the mental mapping project. And I think these criticisms are why the mental mapping project will succeed. Okay. So that'll be the only reason they can succeed, because of these. Thank you. The last paper today is from Masahiro Morioka, who is going to tell us when did bioethics begin in each country, and a proposal for a comparative study. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is probably the last paper.
Yes.
Yes. And I want to read the my abstract. This is on page 22. When did bioethics begin in each country? A proposal of comparative study. And some people say that bioethics began in the USA and has spread around the world. But other people insist that bioethics has existed throughout the ages in every region. And which is correct? Probably it depends on the definition of bioethics. So first, if we define bioethics as a kind of philosophy or ethics of life and death, we can find a great deal of literature from ancient times in every part of the world. So from this perspective, bioethics can be seen as a contemporary version of philosophy or ethics of life and death. Second, if we define it as medical ethics, we can also find various ideas on ethics of medicine. There have been European, Chinese, Islamic, Hindu, Jewish traditions, and many more traditions we have had. So we have had a variety of discussions about euthanasia, abortion, healthy life, the use of medication, medical malpractice, and so on. Third, if we define it as environmental ethics, we have also had various traditions throughout the world. Fourth, if we define it as the discussion of ethical issues arising from contemporary advanced biomedical technology, such as organ transplantation, selective abortion, IVF, and gene therapy, and etc., we can find such discussions probably from the 1960s to the present. Fifth, if we define it, bioethics, as the civil movement that claimed the rights of patients, the rights of women, and the rights of the members of minority groups, then again, such movements have appeared since the 1960s in many countries. Sixth, if we define it as an academic research and discussion, the United States of America would probably be one of the earliest countries to have institutionalized it as an academic discipline. Bioethics as an academic discipline emerged from the late 1970s to 1980s in the USA, but what about other countries? I would like to propose a comparative study of the history of bioethics among countries or among regions. So probably many interesting ideas and discussions will be found through the research. So isn't TRT the best place, one of the best places to discuss this topic? So in addition, I'd like to talk about the situation in Japan. In Japan, bioethics as first, second, third has existed from ancient times. The discussion of ethical issues arising from contemporary advanced biomedical technology began in 1968 when organ transplantation from a pseudo-brain-dead person was performed. In 1972, the Eugenic Protection Law Revision Bill was presented to the Diet, and ethics of selective abortion after amniocentesis began a heated political issue. In this year, women's liberation groups and the disabled group started movement against the revision, and they discussed a number of bioethical issues, though they did not use the word bioethics. And they discovered the problem of our inner eugenic thought, which has become one of the main topics in today's Japanese bioethics. Hence, bioethics as fourth and fifth began in the early 1970s in Japan, and in my view, the crucial year was 1972. And academic research started probably in the mid-1980s, and we imported bioethics literature from English books and journals. And I made some translations at that time. And Japanese Association for Bioethics was established in 1988, and academic books and papers on bioethics began to emerge in this period. Hence, bioethics as sixth is considered to have begun in the late 1980s in Japan. And it is interesting that the criticism of bioethics as an academic discipline has existed from the beginning here. And for example, the subtitle of my first book published in 1988 was Beyond Bioethics. So in this sense, my first book includes the criticism itself to the bioethics paradigm. And it is important to looking for alternative ideas to bioethics as an academic discipline in each country. And it should also be noted that the Journal of Bioethics Institute was first published in 1991 at Tsukuba here, and we have had 8 TRT international conferences here. And so my question is, I have three questions to ask you. I want to ask you 3 questions. The first, what is the definition of bioethics in your country? Or what is the actual idea of bioethics in your country? So what do your colleagues and lay people think about bioethics, the idea or concept of bioethics? And I'd like to know the mainstream ideas and also minority ideas about the concept of bioethics around the world. And the second, when bioethics began and how it has developed in your country. And I'd like to know the history of topics discussed in your country. For example, in Japan, we have, in 1970s, we have discussed such topics as the selective abortion, organ transplantation, and after that, the selection of sex in 1980s, and again the issues of race and transplantation and etc. So, what about in your country? And also, I know we know the situation will probably different between developed countries and developing countries. And the third question is, what kind of reaction did you do in your country to bioethics? In other words, what kind of frustrations did you have? What didn't you have? So I'd like to know, and what alternative idea to bioethics has appeared? For example, what anthropologists, sociologists, philosophers has commented and have said about the bioethics in your country? Did they agree to this discipline, completely agree? Or did they say something or some criticism about it? So this is my presentation, and TRT looks, in this sense, TRT looks truly interdisciplinary, and sometimes it would be chaotic, kind of chaos from ancient philosophers to my project. So I think this place may be unique, but I don't know, because we haven't had shared the discussions, and what kind of discussions do we have around the country and in your countries. We haven't had shared, and we haven't had shared the history of your discussion. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Actually, I would, before answering questions, to give a perspective, could those who have attended every TRT please stand up now?
Every TRT.
Oh. Every TRT.
Oh.
So these are 4 survivors. And so maybe it's interesting.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
You? 3.
Okay.
4.
2, 3, 4. And you. Okay. Okay.
Where's Nobuko?
She's
Nobuko is
outside.
also.
She's also attended, yes.
No, 7.
Jane has only attended 7, not 8.
Okay. I'll take a
So,
view
the
for those.
question is very good.
You can focus.
Okay,
I would
I sit
like,
down.
where's the
This is the
microphone? Here's the
first.
microphone.
And this is the second.
I would like to pass the first question to
いや
それが先生Ben Ichiro.
I have two comments, not questions. The first question, as far as I remember, I was invited to Sorbonne University of France, Paris, in 1973 or 4, under the direction of President Giscard d'Estaing. In Sorbonne, 1 week, only discussed by ethical viewpoint on the future of the man, human being, and the growth, humankind, in 1973 or 74 in France. And I read the first textbook of bioethics, large volume, in 1978, Encyclopedia of Bioethics of Life, published in the United States. But 1 or 2 years before, I read 2 dictionary of medical ethics published in London. My comment.
Thank you. The next is Chiro.
Yeah, I would like to add your comment and so what kind of the philosophy is based on not only bioethics? This must be discussed for every country. What kind of philosophy based on the bioethics?
Is that a question?
No. I would like to add your comment.
Okay.
And, yeah, so that's why I would like to ask also what kind of philosophy you based on in your country. That's in the country means I would like to add your question just like that.
Thank you. Takeshi and then Jay.
Thank you very much. And it is an issue which I began my academic career in bioethics. So when I was a graduate student, I surveyed in the definition of bioethics in Japanese literature. And I found many definitions in Japanese literature of bioethics, and I reached the conclusion that bioethics is what people call it bioethics. It was my conclusion, my definition of bioethics, and it seems probably it is it seems like a standpoint from the social construction theory, because it seems that bioethics or discourse of bioethics or academics of bioethics or something, whatever, it called bioethics discourse itself is socially constructed in history. So it has some kind of history of emerging the bioethics discourse. So I would like to have a comment, and I would like to add another question. And how the bioethics, I mean the quotation, bioethics end quote, has been so constructed or emerged the discourse of bioethics. People call it bioethics, emerging in your country or in the history of your country. So socially, how it socially constructed in your culture and in your society. That's my comment.
While you're writing it down, I'll give it to James, please.
I agree with Bioethics saying that different shades of bioethics is there. I think it will be difficult to define bioethics in one single statement or one single para. I remember Ali asking us a few years ago, is there a symbol? Can you develop a symbol for bioethics? I am also thinking 4 years, but I have not yet arrived. But when I read Indian literature, I find the early doctors, before a few centuries before Christ, they have prescribed how much of money they should get from a patient, and if he is a male doctor, how he should behave with a female patient. So those things are written in early literature. In terms of environmental ethics, I think the first king officially to plant a tree is in Sri Lanka. about 300 BC. So in this way, Asia is the birthplace of medical ethics and environmental ethics.
Thank you. And next to Ali, please, whose first paper at TRT was on symbols. Long time ago.
Just, I wanted to answer one of Professor Moriaka's question, but my focus is only on medical ethics. The book which I found in Tehran University, it was published in Tehran University in 1958. Its name is, in translation, is like medical ethics. It's in Persian language is Adab va Akhlaq Pezeshki, which means medical ethics. And in that book, they mentioned that a name of a physician who teach 10 years before, it means maybe around 1950, he taught medical ethics to medical students. And the content of that book includes like doctor-patient relationship, doctor relationship, doctor-nurse relationship, and also like abortion and end of life.
Thank you. And Frank.
Just, I would like to suggest Professor Moriaka to define the research international project to collect such an information, and at the end, maybe it's possible to publish a book with this title. It would be interesting, I think, for world of bioethics.
Thank you.
Masahiro, I'm not going to try to tell you the history of bioethics in my country or among my people, because I have to talk for 3 or 4 hours, I think. There's so much to it. And I don't, however, I think that Ali's suggestion is excellent. Maybe it would be best if those of us who don't have time to say what we want to say now could send you by email information. We have a graduate of our university who did her PhD. She's a nurse, but she did her PhD on the history of medical ethics in Israel. And I think that she could be a very valuable asset. I could ask her to write to you. So would you be interested in having people write to you by email about this question?
Okay. You can reply to everything now.
Thank you very much for your comments and questions. So I'm going to send emails which appear in this abstract book. Okay? So in this email, I'm going to ask you to send you your opinions and research project back to me. So then I will consider what to do. And Professor Tsuchiyo's comment was very interesting and very important to me. Yes, my presentation lacked your perspective, but I know. So I think I would like to add your aspect to this project, this presentation. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me use the mic. Thank you very much, Masahiro. I think actually the most appropriate place would be your next article in your bias journal in the March issue. Perhaps could be this with the extended questions. So please send your questions and comments to Masahiro, and I would think it's a good place to start. Actually, Masahiro has been writing in the bias journal the second most regularly after myself since the beginning. So, Frank is trying hard to catch up.
I only write comments, like in conferences.
So thank you very much for everyone's diligence, which we now have a chance to reward. Everyone please stay for informal reception that we have now. Now, we're going to eat in the same room, so if you could just do one thing for us, is I'm going to make a line from Irina to across here, And could you please stay that side of the line until we say it's okay? Thank you. It will be a different country. We'll have a visa. So we'll set up food here. We're going to set up the food in front, and then when we're ready, we'll tell you to come in. Thank you. We've got it on tables outside. Is to finish by 5 o'clock. So we have 2 sessions and separated by research trip to space. Then to the Earth and then back. If you like geology museum. I unfortunately have to leave to so I would like to continue. I'm going to show you some examples of emails which people sent about the project, and they raise some of the same discussion points that were made in the conference. So let me go through page by page. I decided the easiest way was just to show by taking emails, some of the emails from my computer and putting it into this MS Word document. This is from Dr. Don Beck, and in its response to the description in Discover magazine of the human behaviourome. He says, we have been working with the concept of memetics for almost a decade based on the original use of the term mean by Richard Dawkins. We meshed this language and concept with the seminal work of the late Professor Graves, who in the early 1950s began to do basic research on the levels of biopsychosocial systems formed in individuals and human groupings. And it says in 1981, this man left his teaching to launch a major field test of this comprehensive model of human evolution and shifting the South African apartheid system away from racial ethnic categories and into the area of value systems, levels of consciousness and modes of determining the priorities in life. After 63 trips to South Africa, I'm now in the process of constructing this major conceptual model, which we're calling the Global Nemo. And he's going to launch this project later. And it mentions a person, John Webster, who has applied the mimetic model in examining the value systems in New Zealand, which in a book, in fact, I'm not aware of yet, but it's interesting. And he'd like to start a dialogue for collaboration between the Behaviourome project and the Nemo project. And this was interesting. I believe we have discovered the master meme maker. I thought it was God, but anyway. The process which causes new value systems to emerge that will transcend and include those which have been awakened already. This very sophisticated theory is able to identify centers of gravity and even plot the dynamics of change. The researcher has been elegant, the field testing experiences have been quite unique. We come across many academic disciplines. Next paragraph, we have joined Ken Wilber in forming the Integral Institute, a new academic and applied group that will introduce this body of knowledge as the key intellectual underpinning of the post-modern age.
So that was interesting. And I've said this, I'd be interested, and I'll let these people know after our meeting. It's interesting about planning to set up a research institute in Texas to identify, integral, align, and synchronize the myriad of approaches to what we call the human memo. Since we focus on underlying mimetic codes rather than behavioral displays, we are able to offer this as a companion piece to the human genome that also deals with genetic codes. We sincerely believe that the future of this life on this planet as we know it may well hinge on our ability to deal with the global memo. So that is an interesting project that will be announced later on this year. Some connection to them. Next, I want to go back to an email I received in November based on a Nature article. And this man, Graham Douglas, is originator of the terms integrative mind, integrative problem solving, and integrative improvement. And mapping of past ideas could be useful exercise. Perhaps it can stifle creativity as a concept that best practice can do. And this was one of the concerns raised by several of you in talks. The technique of integrative thinking is acquired by learning satisfying, optimum, achievable results ahead process of integrative thinking. So this person's into integrative thinking, and you can check on the website there. Okay. Okay. So it's www.developmentgateway.org. Ron Weil was talking about the article that appeared on Wired magazine about the Behaviourome project. And he has a website which is called this one, www.thegreatideas.org. By the way, I've also been offered the use of a website that somebody had already reserved, something like idea.com, for this project, which I may use. I'm not quite sure yet. But we will be creating a website in the coming several weeks after this meeting for the mental mapping project. So these are some more projects. This man, Lawrence Rothfield, is the Cultural Policy Center at the University of Chicago, and he's interested in the cultural aspects. And so this person, John Webster, sent a poster to the conference. The poster was on display on Sunday, and also his book is on by the orchids at the back table. Okay. He was nominated for Pulitzer Prize. He has suggested that we should look at existing codifications of knowledge. For those of you, I think you all are aware that there's a Wired magazine article about this project. Okay, and that's the website. You can get it if you want later, or just look on Wired magazine. And in that, they looked at the question whether we have enough data to start such a project. And I think we do have enough data to start trying to synthesize it into something more than just tables of categories of comments, which we've been doing for the last 10 years.
and how to process the interviews or studies that we do, we have to find a common framework between fields. So, for example, Margaret pointed out some of the limitations of surveys, that how do we combine in a common language the results of different ways to look at the human mind. And this is one of the, I think, ideas that I have of making a mental map is we will put together the comments from people who prefer surveys, people who like interviews, people who like to go and live for a few months as an anthropologist, people who want to write about experience of their own life and circle. Any approach. But between these different approaches, we need a common framework, and that's one of the merits of the mental map, is it will provide a common framework to place these ideas onto. Another article which was written, which was a critical article, was in a tech magazine in Silicon Valley, and it's called Big Idea, Bad Idea. And it correctly says, I think we can count ideas, and then it says, in the third paragraph, to believe that human ideas are finite is to give up on invention. If ideas are finite, and we have already used up all the available ideas, which Mesa implies, then invention is impossible. It is rare to see a scientist make such an argument, especially when it is so clearly false. Okay. So, that's why I found other papers. I'm prepared for criticism already. I don't think I'm saying that we have to give up creating new ideas. The mental map is to put all the existing data into a framework and to say that I think the number is finite. It does not mean that once I've formed a map of all the points on my grid, or in 5 or 6 dimensions if we can do that, that we won't ever think of a new idea. Okay? I don't think that's correct. I think we will find new ideas. I think we'll eventually get down to a level, however, that we will have most of the ideas there. And we'll just be adding to it. So it will be like our dictionary, a living dictionary. We will be able to add to it, the map. Okay? It's like when people were mapping the world in the last few thousand years, the circle and the maps grew and grew and grew. The same as the maps of the universe today are growing. So we are mapping ideas we will find. So we have to think map. And no discussion?
There's no discussion possible like this.
Oh, well, I'll go through this. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Morgan. Keep her in line. Morgan will protect me.
Working is to shake now.
Yeah. A revolution in family values. Now this is this is from John Webster by his book is at the back. He has all these sets of ideas and peers, and I'll just go quickly through that, and then we might have time for some people to have discussion. Then, for example, doing these sorts of words and ideas, this is one approach, and here's a website. But he's, I think, into largely good ethical behavior. And then I found many of these sorts of words here, like these sorts of words. I wonder, is this idea mapping? Well, in a sense it is, but this is not the sorts of ideas I had first in mind. They clearly they have to be in the map. So what I'm thinking, and I hope it was clear, is when we make a decision, what ideas do we have in our head when we make this decision? So this, I think,
we will include all ideas if we can, but focusing on moral decision making is what is useful for the bioethics field. And as John Rue suggested, by starting with a reasonable area, we can map and then we can expand. So it is possible that we divide our tasks to different areas of thinking, to different groups in this project, to map out certain areas of a mental map. That is one possible division of labour. But another division of labour is clearly using different methodologies to come and find the common ideas and a framework to represent these, so there's common language between all disciplines. Okay. So in a sense we have to find this common language to start and progress, I think, the fields that we're working in. Okay, I don't think I will go on any further. I will welcome discussion. We can have the lights on. Thank you. I'll just put my machine back there. I believe I saw some hands up. Okay, Irina and then Lana, and I'm going to pass microphones out. Thank you.
I just would like a request. Do you think you could email us the main websites so we can do our homework in the chat? Please? You can just abstract them.
So I was trying to write down emails so I couldn't get them in.
I plan to have a number of links on the home page I've created for 2 or 3 weeks, so that will be in there. Lana? I'll put one microphone at the back. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I am for the idea to make this map. And I don't care if the idea are infinite or not. Whatever it could be done, the maximum will be welcome. And I drew 3 models. I think I saw something about the spiral of values. I think the same thing like the DNA, like this, about each value and each idea, and in each culture, and then how it could be the cross culture. About each component of this, for example, loving life, sequences of loving life, loving good, sequences of loving good, and then. Another model is the sphere, open sphere, integrated, and because if we make, maybe I think Arena raised that point, it could be open, something must be open. And another sequence is like the spiral, but open spirals. Also, it could be for each value, for the good and the bad, everything. I put but I saw in your courier there is some ideas, similar ideas. Why I agree for that? You know, I think that the value of the French Revolution are still dominating, only liberty, equality also, and this is the base of the UN, human rights and so on. I think it is not enough, it's not sufficient. And I'm wondering if we work on such map, and we will see the cross point and where these cultures meet. Maybe
the human rights, and maybe it could be a, we can start to change, to suggest something on the international level to change these values and the application of this, what at the UN, because it's used actually, everybody I think agree that. Then this is our guidelines, and so in each country you can work and we can see what is not fair, and justice and so on. I think stressing on the values and try to map all this history and all this idea could help to for the future, of course, now and for the future. Thank you.
I think I've said most of what I want to say yesterday, but I'd like to emphasize that any data one ever collects is never neutral. And it's always up to the people who categorize and the ideas that we can find, the ones that exist among us, not among the people without voices, not among people without writing. For instance, the societies that are disappearing, these ideas we will not be able to include. And it's also, I think, not so much the idea of wanting to collect data for a book, encyclopedia of bioethical ideas that I would oppose, but the enormous pretension of making something parallel to a DNA map, which I think, well, in short, I find very dangerous.
I think one of the most important things is how this map will be used and what, whether it's philosophical and general or whether it can be operationalized into practice for the purposes of increasing bioethical and environmental progress in the world. And to that end, I think it needs to somehow be operationalized and in other words, based in the theory of problem solving or decision making or management. And that I think ideas can also be put into the form of problems, and these problems can be prioritised, for example, according to magnitude, urgency, and I think that if you nest ideas or problems within broader categories, which are probably infinite in the direction towards specialisation, but finite in the upper direction towards generalisation. But if you prioritise these problems, I would suggest that the topmost problem or aim of bioethics would be biosurvival. But I think that to sell the concept maybe human survival would be the more popular mean. And if the map were able to be practically useful to people in solving their problems, it would not only be more popular, but would make a larger impact on the world.
Margaret's comment. I want to say it's not impossible to structuralize human thinking, just like the DNA model. But first, I think we probably would have to look into something like how, when, why, and under what circumstances ideas emerge. And then looking at different dimensions of the ideas, and then going back to making a framework for producing like something like a DNA structure to suggest that linking ideas back to that model, not from the model to the ideas. So something like that.
I do not deny the possibility of being able to structure human thought. That's happened thousands and thousands of times, and people have been ambitious enough to try and do that. So people among them, dictatorships, have tried it too. It all depends on who is making the categories. It will never be an objective kind of project. Like you could say, maybe you could objectively structure DNA, but it will only be a genetic map. And scientists nowadays now also know that we should never exaggerate the implications of the DNA blueprint map. It's not even a blueprint. So we know that it's far more complex. DNA is linked to the biological processes in cells, which you cannot separate from the DNA. And similarly, ideas are part and parcel of context, and if you want to make a structure of the world, it's always a human who is choosing ideas. We'd have to guess which humans will have the decision power to structure these ideas. And I'm afraid that maybe not the people who are underrepresented in this world will have the power to create such a map.
Maybe I'll reply later.
Or you can make a brief point if you want.
I think we are always dominated by subjective things. It is not we are, of course, what you said, it is it's true. But we are living in this world, searching, always seeking the truth, seeking something. So we can try, why not? And it will not be one person, if it will be a collective work, and with this interchangeability and this interaction, we could be a little bit ambitious, but maybe not on the absolute. We have to try, because actually we are dominated by something subjective. You know, when I think at the UN and what is happening around in the overall the world, it's horrible. Why we cannot try to not to structures, as you said, but to search the similarity between the cultures regarding some values, to be more realistic and applicable, and we can also monitor that, not in the way what has been done until now.
I agree very much with you that we should try something. That's also the reason that I'm here. But I disagree with the ambition of the project and pretending that it covers everything, all ideas. I think that's the wrong way to start. We should start modestly with small projects, with things that we can discuss and we know the background of, and not with, well, someone, I don't know who, but someone choosing the categories with which we will work. It's just too big. Start small, that's the most beautiful one.
Okay, Takeshi, please.
I have several comments to this project, and actually I cannot understand still what's the content of the project and what Daryl wants to do in this project. And but I think that the project might not be entirely useless, might not be, but at least very careful specification must be needed, I think. For example, at least the concept of mind or idea are too vague and too abstract. And we cannot reach the consensus on what it means by mind or idea, I think. So if you want to make something, you want to make some successful result, I think that you would, it is better to take more concrete and especially operational word or concept. So, for example, you already have done many empirical survey and empirical studies on bioethics and research the general people's attitude to something. like prenatal diagnosis or abortion or euthanasia or something. So why do you take attitude instead of mind or idea? And it may be useful by analyzing attitude. Okay, so this is the first my comment. And although, this is the second comment, but although the concept of attitude you take, but the same attitude can be based on different motives. For example, if you want to do good someone, to do good something, for example, I'd like to help older people in the bus, and I'd like to give my seat to the older women or something. I behave, act, the conduct based on the every and all of these motives. So I would like to be a good man. This is perhaps self-love. And of course, I want to do good things. So this is loving good. And I have an idea that I want to be kind to other men. This is love of others. And also I have memories of my father or mother. So and I want to care for the people, and this contains memories. And of course I hope this kind of motives also include the hopes of somewhere to someone. So I think that it is difficult to analyze the motives of the attitude. So it must be much more. You must be much more operational, much more. And I wonder if it can succeed to catch the core of concept, which must be the basis of the project. This is the second.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give the order. I think you've just shown why this model is very successful. Thank you. Because that's why I have all 6 dimensions. That's why your decision is made that way. Yeah. But I'll reply. You said you think all the ideas are involved when you make a decision, and I think no, only some ideas are involved in each action. That's the difference.
Yeah, but the problem is that I cannot map on that diagram.
You're inside. All of your ideas will be in the map. There may be 6,219 ideas in your head. All of them will be there, and then we'll see how they work together. I thought this would be a diagram, so to speak. John Brew, please.
What wasn't mentioned was that maybe you would give your seat to the little old lady because you know she's going to die soon and she's going to love you and give you a big present.
John Brew, please. Next.
I'm going to reiterate my position I already expressed yesterday. No, the day before yesterday. In my own opinion, a single comprehensive map of all human ideas is practically unfeasible at this moment and of little use. However, subject or issue-specific map could be useful for practical purpose. So, the first step should be to identify what the subject or issues at question are. Okay, so let's be less ambitious and let's be more sensitive. I am willingly I really appreciate Margaret's comment that we have to be more sensitized to the underrepresented or not represented in this relationship of, all present relationship of power in our intellectual discourse and writing. And so unless you write, your opinions and your ideas are not expressed, not heard, and not left in history. So we have to be more sensitive.
Thank you. Thank you. Blanche and Fermi.
Sorry, there I didn't consider about your mental life a lot. But I suddenly generate an idea, and I believe that maybe we can live the human ideas. I think my model is we can use both detective method and detective method and indetective method both together.
Deductive method?
Yes, detective method and indetective method together. Yeah, first, let's give one or several situations, and we can use a hydrotype method, snowballing samplings to choose individuals, maybe in several regions in the world, and maybe around 100 people. And let first use the detective method, let them to say their ideas about this situation. There are several levels. First, emotional, and second, rational, and theoretical, and they can generate many ideas, 100, 1,000, and very numerous. And from these ideas, the second stage is use indetective method. We can categorize, analyze which idea is similar, is belong to physical, and the other belong to psychological, and the other belong to memory and future plans, and we can categorize, and so that we can have ideas.
I think what I wanted to say was already said by Jan-san, so I'll pass it to the next person.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry. I think, well, we've got Sakai, since you've been devoted so much, I'll give you the mic. Everyone enjoyed breakfast so much. It's a good idea.
My idea about mental map is it is not necessary to have only one model. We could have various models depending on the purpose, what we use for that map. So for example, think about the ordinary map we use. We have atlas, world atlas, and we have city map and town map. And we also have weather map like precipitation and temperature in each areas. And for example, when we are utilizing city map, we don't care that the map ignores there is a sky above the city or there is the United States outside the map. No, we don't care because we know the limitation of the map. So I think, so depending on what purpose we'd like to utilize a map, maybe we can have various models. Maybe this three-dimensional model can be very useful for a particular purpose, but maybe two-dimensional, much simpler model can be useful to solve a much limited local problem in a locality. So that's my idea.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Sakai. Yeah, I think we can, it's a good part, we could have some parts of the model being applied in different circumstances because it may be too complex. Well, we now have going to resume this discussion formally at 3 o'clock, possibly a little earlier if we get back earlier from our trip. Early maybe.
The real mental map. I would like to thank you for your homework performed in the beginning of the day. There's a couple of people didn't put the names on their contributions, so they can't get credit for the course.
And they can't be punished.
They still could be punished for not handing in the assignment.